Game over, man. Game over.
Johnny. You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for February 17th, 2026, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brennan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for a conversation on a movie that is absolutely not polarized at all.
Everyone loves it.
Everyone loves it. There's been no debate, no vitriol at all. It's been lovely.
I'm so glad we don't live in that boring world.
No, we are, of course, here to talk about the latest adaptation of Wuthering Heights, this time from one Emerald Fennell. And I guess maybe we can start the conversation there, Brendan, because this is her third feature. We have reviewed her previous two here on the show. But for those joining us that have not heard our thoughts on Fennell before, what do you think about her as a filmmaker?
I'm trying to be a little bit coy with what I think about her as a filmmaker because they're kind of baked into my opening thoughts on Wuthering Heights. I can't really talk about that film without talking about her, but I guess this is good setup. I'll just simply say, I think she's got something. I don't know what that thing is, but clearly she has something because whenever she makes a movie, people talk. People talk about it. They also talk about her specifically, and we don't see that very often, right? Especially for female directors specifically that almost capture this like celebrity filmmaker status, right? That's kind of awesome that she has that.
Yeah.
The films are not for me, but I don't know if I would change a thing about them. I find her work personally very misguided, very surface level, but clearly people are talking about them. So I don't know if I would change a thing about them. That's what makes her fascinating. She is a filmmaker where I think I have more fun talking about and maybe even hearing her talk about how she interprets theme and narrative. I think I enjoy those things more than I do actually experiencing her movies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fair. It has been interesting to see the reactions to all three of them. They've been polarized. Some people love them. Others very much do not. And I do agree with you that there is something there. And maybe this tailors to what you were saying in terms of how this will bleed into our conversation on the film itself. Because I think I have figured out what that is for me.
Okay.
And it very much tailors to my thoughts on Wuthering Heights as well, so maybe we can save that.
Sure,
but
sounds good.
There is something there. I do understand the vitriol to some degree. Honestly, I feel like from every angle of it, there is something of merit to it. The criticisms I have very much felt and agreed with regarding the three movies, but at the same time, when it comes to her filmmaking and certain craft elements of those movies, I can see the appeal there for sure. So it's one of those things where I can understand both sides of it, and I think it really just kind of comes down to what matters to you most when it comes to her movies and what she brings to the cinematic buffet.
Are you more of a story person or are you more of a sensational person? If that makes sense. There are many filmmakers out there where we've said this very thing about, right, JD, where someone may be a better writer than they are a director, or maybe a better director than they are a writer. I feel like Emerald Fennell is a better director than she is a writer. And we'll certainly talk about that as it relates to Wuthering Heights as well. We're in a day and age where it seems like Hollywood and even many filmmakers are really pushing the singular artist approach, right? Whereas some great artists know how to collaborate with other points of view. And I think Emerald Fennell is one of those individuals that would probably benefit from a little bit of collaboration. Like talking to a few other artists and hearing how their viewpoints differ from hers. And maybe we could talk about that further as it relates to Wuthering Heights specifically. But I think she's one of those filmmakers that needs maybe a group session to maybe hone in on certain things that she is very good at. And there are things that she is very good at. We'll talk about them.
Yeah.
It's just it's not all there for a singular vision, I think, in her case.
For sure. And before we get into it, I also wanted to ask you as well, removing the Fennell side of it and just focusing on the Wuthering Heights side of it, do you have a favorite adaptation of this material as it's been adapted several different times to this point?
That is a great question. It's been adapted, what, like 600 times?
Feels like
at this point.
Feels like it.
And I mean, I have to admit, so this is one of those classic novels, the Bronte novels specifically, where I'm pretty sure I was tasked with reading this in maybe my 9th or 10th grade English class, and I admittedly spark noted it, which is very unfair because it actually seemed like a very compelling story. I was just very, naive at that time at a young age and didn't really want to put in the work to absorb such a dense novel. But it is a very compelling story, and many of these adaptations over the years have interpreted this novel in varying ways because it is so dense and so all-encompassing. I would say maybe the adaptation that comes to mind the most for me might be the one from 2011, the Andrea Arnold film.
Yeah.
Which, again, it still has a small scale to it because it has a very indie film kind of flair, which might not match the epic scope of the novel itself, but I think it captures something that makes that one of the more unique adaptations of this particular story. I know a lot of people would probably cite the 1939 film. Is that the year that came out? Yeah, with Laurence Olivier. I understand why that one is often very cited, but there's something about Andrea Arnold's adaptation, and especially the interpretation of the Heathcliff character, that I think make that one very unique.
I agree, and that was where I was going to go as well. I do know the William Wyler film is highly regarded for the most part, but I don't love that movie. I think it's okay. I don't think it's terrible, but I don't think it's the classic that it's often heralded as either. I think the melodrama itself is fine, but it's contrived. It's certainly sacrificing certain developments of the novel for time, as is the case with all of these films to some degree or another, obviously. So that adaptation, I think, does a decent job, but I think fails in some important aspects given the material.
It's a film of its time. I think when you look at it as a film of its time, as an epic film of its time, I think there's more to appreciate there. But as a representation of Bronte's novel, it misses the mark a little bit, I think.
And I agree with you about the Andrea Arnold adaptation. Now, I haven't seen it since its release, so I don't know if I would feel the same, but after watching that in 2011, 12, whenever that came out, I was a big fan of it at the time. And I think part of it is how she develops that material within her indie sensibilities, as you were somewhat talking about there. And it's also just really bleak. And there's something about the cynical perspective she gives to that film, especially through the lens of Heathcliff, as you're talking about, that I do think is quite effective. At least that's how I felt at the time. Again, it's been 15 years since that film came out.
And she's a filmmaker, Andrea Arnold specifically, that I have a lot of respect for, and I have a lot of time for. And for what I remember with that specific adaptation of Wuthering Heights, it taps into something that made that one very unique, as opposed to trying to do everything that classic novel represents, because that novel is doing so much. It is at times a tragic romance. It is also at times a revenge story from the Heathcliff perspective, and even I guess when his brother gets involved, if I'm not mistaken. And then it all of a sudden becomes kind of a ghost story with a new generation involved, like children become involved too. It's a very generational movie, and clearly Emerald Fennell is not interested in a lot of those things. We'll simply say.
We'll get into that as
Yeah.
well. I also wanted to note that there is the 1992 adaptation with Juliette Binoche and Ray Fiennes, which I have not seen, but have heard mixed things about as well.
Wasn't that Ray Fiennes' first film?
Was it his very first? I'm not sure.
I gotta look that
That's
up.
fascinating if that's the case.
I'm gonna fact check that while we're talking.
Yeah. How about your first role is Wuthering Heights, and you also get to be with Juliette Binoche and Janet McTeer and a bunch of other legends.
That is a heck of a way to start one's career, especially considering that 1 or 2 years later you'd be in Schindler's List.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, I don't know
Wuthering
if
Heights.
there's
Yeah, that's his first movie.
very first one. That is fascinating.
Yeah.
I
Wow.
know there's a 1970 iteration with Timothy Dalton. I haven't seen that one, so I
The
can't.
great
really speak to
Timothy
that one
Dalton,
either.
maybe the greatest
Yeah.
James Bond of all time.
Yep. I don't know if there is a great adaptation. Maybe there is.
Or at the very
There's
least,
certainly some blind spots for me,
Yeah.
for sure.
or at the very least, is there one that is often cited as maybe the premier adaptation? I guess it's the William Wyler film, maybe
Yeah.
the go-to adaptation, the most cited version. But I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if
mean,
there's a definitive one, if that makes sense.
I think if we're talking general zeitgeist, most people, at least the older cinematic heads out there, would point to Wyler. I do think there's a lot of modern cinematic hipsters that will point out Andrea Arnold, and for good reason.
Like us.
Yeah, like us, exactly. And I do think that is arguably, again, I haven't seen some of the others, but that could be it, especially in time. I mean, it's only been 15 years. That Wyler film has been around for decades, obviously, and has had the luxury of time to garner a reputation. Maybe that'll happen for Arnold in time.
I
Who
wonder.
knows?
I wonder.
We'll see.
I'm looking at how many. I'm looking at Emily Bronte's IMDb profile here. This is obviously the original author of Wuthering Heights, born in 1818, died in 1848. I'm losing count at how many Wuthering Heights I see here. It's
It's a lot.
it's wild.
It's a lot.
It's varying mediums. It's not just movies. It's also a lot of television, some miniseries here. So
It is
yeah,
a
there's lot
very
here.
popular work of art, for sure.
I kind of want to
People
read
do
it.
love it.
I kind of want to sit down and give it a proper read outside of my Spark Notes knowledge of it that I did back in high school.
When we launch in-session novels, that'll be the first one.
Okay, we're not committing to a whole show about books. I just want to read this one.
Just kidding.
That's what all is for.
Exactly. All right, well, let's go ahead and jump into this. Wuthering Heights, the latest adaptation. Who knows? Maybe there'll be another one in 2 years' time. But as of now, the latest adaptation is written and directed by Emerald Fennell. It stars Margot Robbie, Jacob Elordi, Hung Chau, Shazad Latif, forgive me if I'm butchering that name there, Allison Oliver, and a few others that come and go throughout the film. This is usually where I go to if you're not familiar with this material, but I'm guessing most of you are very, very familiar with this material, whether you've read the novel or not, because again, there's been 1,000 adaptations of it. But just in case, it is a passionate and tumultuous love story set against the backdrop of the Yorkshire moors, exploring the intense and destructive relationship between Heathcliff and Catherine Earnshaw. All right, Brendan, give it to me. What did you think about Wuthering
Give
Heights?
it to you. I love how you posed it in that way. It's not for me. It wasn't for me. And yeah, I do, like I said with my opening thoughts around Emerald Fennell herself, I don't know if I would change a thing about it because I like when a filmmaker like this is able to capture the zeitgeist in some way and people talk about him or her. And I kind of appreciate that. I still find Emerald Fennell's films quite misguided, very surface level. I find when she pokes the bear, like she often does, it's very visual. It's not really topical, in my opinion. And I feel like she's doing the same thing here with Wuthering Heights. We should also note that this movie is technically called quote unquote Wuthering Heights, at least if you look at the poster, because this is essentially only adapting the first half of Emily Bronte's book. And I know that's been noted by a few critics already who are more knowledgeable of the source material, but it really is only a portion of it. And I kind of knew that going in, and I was able to sense that while watching it and sitting in that theater experiencing this. I just kept looking at the screen thinking to myself, what is Emerald Fennell trying to do here? Like, what is her goal with this material? She's significantly deviating from the source material quite a bit at times, and I really couldn't understand why. And perhaps that's just my ignorance from what the movie is giving me, but I have some thoughts of what she might be going for, and I don't really think they're all that interesting. We could talk about them later, but I was left very puzzled by this. I'm glad that it seems to be stimulating a conversation. Perhaps that will allow her to make whatever film she wants to do next that might be more interesting and more compelling for me. But this is 3 for 3 where I just haven't fully gotten what she was trying to do. I find her films very surface level, and I think this is yet again another example of that.
Yeah, I am with you. I'm at a point now where I can say confidently, at least as of this recording, that Emerald Fennell as a filmmaker just isn't for me. And what's really funny is how the very opening of this film sets the tone for Fennell's rebelliousness.
Yeah.
When all we hear is moaning and the creaking of what sounds like bed springs over a black screen, very much invoking an erotic imagination. But that's not at all what we see when the first frame of the film arrives. And it's the perfect microcosm for this film. Some of it is the marketing, and to be fair to Fennell, that's not on her. Although much of it is also her approach to this material. So she is far from blameless. But instead of getting an adaptation of Wuthering Heights and the implied provocative romance, not just from the marketing, but also in Fennell's imagery, what she gives us herself, we essentially get a disconnected, subdued narrative that's more about petty revenge, excluding the more sophisticated nuances that we get in the back half of the novel. To me, it feels like Fennell wanted to craft an original love story, and the studio told her no, unless she funnels it through some sort of IP. And so she landed on Wuthering Heights, and that's how she got the green light. Because what we see here is a very loose adaptation.
Yeah.
I know Fennell has openly called this a personal interpretation, and that only confirms my theory. I'm utterly convinced that she wanted to tell a different story, but was forced to meld her ideas with the characters and context of Wuthering Heights, which explains why this film is so disjointed from a storytelling perspective. I don't think the narrative here works at all, and we'll certainly get into all those reasons as to why.
Sure.
But that said, I do think there is plenty to appreciate in terms of craft. The cinematography is noteworthy, especially in a world where so many movies don't have a lighting or color department, apparently. So
Linus Sandgren's just really good at its job.
Yeah. I mean, say what you will about this film, but it does look like a movie. And I do appreciate its visual gusto. Jacob Elordi is once again phenomenal. He's easily my favorite thing about this film. Hands down.
Oh,
his performance is incredible. I think he's really, really good. The production design, the costume design, the music, I think is all stimulating, all very good in a in a vacuum. I just wish Fennell was able to marry her filmmaking with her writing. The way she approaches her movies from a script perspective is a deep fundamental flaw, and it completely derails her storytelling. This film is no exception, and I sadly did not care for this all that much, despite how much I do admire the craft. And again, that's why I want to avoid the Fennell wars, if you will.
Oh, sure.
I don't care to get into that landscape.
She's good at
because
certain things.
there are good things here. I can't just blatantly disregard certain elements of this because I think the writing here is porous. There are good things here to appreciate in terms of the craft. But on the whole, I don't think the craft can make up the gaps for how flawed the foundation is.
How rudimentary
from a
it basically is.
yeah.
I feel like is the best way I can put it. And that's why I said earlier that she might be a better director than she is a writer, because I feel like the way she navigates theme and the way that she navigates story generally has been the problem with all three of her movies. But they all feature, or at the very least, they all usually feature very compelling performances and very lush production design. And this is once again no exception. So she's clearly good at doing certain things. I think she has a better eye than she does an ear, if that makes sense. And I think that's once again on display here. I do think of the two leads, Jacob Elordi is certainly more of a standout here. But I think the standout generally for me was probably Alison Oliver as Isabella. She has one key scene, actually it's her introduction, where I started to get a sense of what Emerald Fennell's intent may have been, where she is essentially paraphrasing the events of Romeo and Juliet. And the way she is explaining the plot of Romeo and Juliet in a way that makes it seem like this time period would have seen that story as like a YA novel or a romantasy novel like we do today, right? Maybe Emerald Fennell was trying to say something about how Wuthering Heights may have felt for those who originally read it in the 1800s, how maybe they would have perceived it something similarly to how we do with many young adult fantasy novels these days or romance novels. And perhaps that's how it made her feel, and she was trying to capture a feel of that. But I don't know if that's all that interesting when I feel like the movie is constantly pulling its punches. I loved the opening frame that you were highlighting in your opening thoughts. I loved the subversion of that. And it seemed to suggest this like almost devilish, sinful, impure depiction of sex at a time when you shouldn't think of it that way. And this is a movie that's constantly teasing that eroticism and that sensuality, only for it to never really go there. It's always flirting with going there. And if that is ultimately the intent, to try to keep us away from going there like that, I just don't find that very interesting. I find that to be kind of sanitized for something that I think is actually more interesting when you actually look at what the Isabella character is regurgitating and how false that they kind of perceive this world to be. Like, there are interesting things here. I just don't think Fennell is very good at tapping into what could be deeper there.
No, I completely agree. And I think you're getting to a point about the film that I think is foundationally what's wrong with the film. And I don't know if this was Fennell's intent, but what the film seems to be suggesting to me the most is how lust and death is synonymous. Again, going back to her writing and the approach to this material, there's always something that I find misguided. And in this case, it's the absence of the novel's nuanced examinations of not just romance and lust, but class, racism, violence, cyclical, generational trauma, and love as an identity. When you remove those things, all you're left with is petty revenge when things don't go your way. And I do admire that she wants to reinterpret this material in a modern, anachronistic way. But if that's going to be your vision for this film, you have to go all the way with it. And to your point, the film doesn't fully commit to its evocative teases. It almost feels as if some of the shots here were meant exclusively for the trailer. I'm thinking of Heathcliff fingering the egg yolk, or the housemaid kneading the dough. In context of this film, that imagery is hollow. But that could be part of the gag, because this film wants to subvert its titillating teases to really be more about how romance and lust leads to your demise. Again, I don't think that was Fennell's intent. Maybe it was, but without the film exploring social context of the time and it leaving out some of the book's most important details, its themes can easily be misconstrued.
Yeah.
Either way, this film is without question subverting sexual tension to say something about the consequences of lust. And I think it fails to maximize on that ideal because it's lost between wanting to be its own thing and also serving as an adaptation. And it is not able to have its cake and eat it too.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. I think both of these ideas, or really all of these ideas, I think are affable in their own way. The idea that lust and death are synonymous, as you very eloquently put it. And then there's this whole notion of, the falsification of sex and eroticism at this time. These are very compelling ideas, but I don't think there's a through line between those two ideas that we just referenced.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to heighten the synonymous nature of death and lust being the same thing, I think you kind of owe it to yourself to go a little bit deeper and go all the way with that eroticism. I think that allows that through line to be a bit clearer. And I feel like Fennell is working with two, at the very least, if not more, two very interesting ideas that she doesn't know how to interlock. And they feel like very distant ideas, to the point that the actual film itself, and you highlighted the narrative blemishes and how the way that this movie moves just feels so disconnected. I felt like I was watching a movie that was edited for television, sanitized. Like that's kind of how it felt.
Yeah.
Again, if that is the point, that's a fine point to make, as long as it's interwoven within a narrative where that makes sense. And I just don't think this was the one.
Exactly. It's like it wants to be erotica, but doesn't know how to be. And I feel like that's a problem given what the vision of this film really is as its own interpretation that has removed so many vital contexts.
I mean,
the novel.
If her goal was to maybe create some type of commentary, kind of like the Isabella character and how she interprets Romeo and Juliet as this sort of YA central experience, if Fennell wants to make some type of commentary about how we we as people have maybe perceived Wuthering Heights in that way, and we should be wrong for doing so, okay, that's actually an interesting idea. But I feel like that's maybe only here 5% of the time.
Yeah.
and that's the thing. By not going there, it's not just in the sensual nature of it. It doesn't feel committed to its own ideas at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's where it also feels kind of like it's pulling its punches.
Yeah. And I do want to talk a little bit more about why I do think removing some of those sophistications from the novel is quite egregious here. But before we get to that, again, just to emphasize the point, if you're going to remove that and you're just going to focus on the first half of the novel and that central romance between Heathcliff and Catherine, you have to fully commit to it. You have to commit to the evocative nature that you've been teasing at certain points in the first half of the film. And it has to be exclusively about that relationship and that romance and lust being the driving force for the demise. And I just don't think the film gets there. I just don't think that it fully commits. And that becomes a problem because then now you're inviting the absence of that context that's missing. You're inviting that to now be a part of the critical landscape here. And that just opens up a huge can of worms that you can't afford to when you've removed such vital themes from the original source material.
Well, and even some of its ideas around the innocence of sexual sin from a very young demographic at this time, these characters are essentially teenagers in a way, right? Or maybe early 20s at the very least. I think that's what they're supposed to be playing. And that's what leads to jealousy. There's almost like this childish nature of how it treats high society, which I feel like maybe Fennell is also trying to get at. again, it only feels like it's maybe 5% there. And I think that's an idea that actually could work hand in hand with some of these other ideas that you're talking about. It feels more beholden to the aesthetics than anything else. And that's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. And I think as a result, another problem here is that it's lacking in emotionality. Those opening scenes, I do think, are great. I love the young actors here and their chemistry.
I wanted a whole movie with that. Yeah, that was actually I honestly 20 minutes into the movie, I was like, wait, people don't like this. I'm vibing with this.
I could have gone with that the whole time as well.
Yeah.
But Catherine and Heathcliff as adults leave something to be desired, and I don't think it's the actors. Robbie and Elordi are both excellent performers, and when given the runway, there is sensual chemistry between them. But because of how the film navigates itself narratively, inside of its misguided subversions, as we're talking about, the emotion is vacant for me. And again, I think it's why the writing here is its biggest sin. I would perfectly be okay with this film being one note regarding its themes of lust and demise if it fully committed to that being its ethos. The idea of letting petty revenge be the thing that kills your lover is a compelling idea. I'm not at all downplaying its potential on paper. It really is fascinating. I just don't think Fennell commits to it as we're talking about. There's a lot of style over substance here, and I hate to use that phrase. It's often overused and a bit vacuous in most review conversations, but it's dangerously close to being applicable here for me.
Well, it's I'm with you.
And again,
keep going.
I do admire the craft and how cinematic it is. I'm not against Fennell's style. I just think she needs to find a way to marry her filmmaking with her writing in the ways that a Wes Anderson did with the Royal Tenenbaums, for example.
Sure.
Because right now it is a problem for me and a lot of others apparently as well. And again, not just on a thematic level in giving her films a sense of weight, but connecting the audience emotionally. I was so emotionally removed from this.
Well, I think the problem here with Emerald Fennell, and I do agree with you generally that the critical phrase style over substance is a bit tiring nowadays, but it is arguably applicable here for this particular movie. But I think that side of it, the substance side of it, is just something that isn't one of Emerald Fennell's strengths. She's a stylish filmmaker. And in her case, maybe the solution is style over even more style, and then throw some more style after that. Because some of the moments here that I actually did vibe with outside of the opening 20 minutes, it's the moments when it basically acts as a straight up music video. Some of the moments where you got Charlie XCX's music and her original songs kind of guiding the narrative through, and the movie is not reliant on dialogue to carry the plot when it becomes more of a visual experience, I think that's where the film is at its best. And I think if the film maybe committed more to that vibe, it would have allowed more room for interpretation, maybe some ambiguity as to what this particular adaptation is meant to do, but I think it would have actually invited that type of ambiguity in a way that felt earned, as opposed to trying to fill those gaps in with a bunch of plotting and story and thematic substance that's actually attempting to be on the page. I guess that's my way of saying, if this movie ended up opening the way it did and then just transitioned to a 2-hour Charlie XCX music video, I think I would have been actually okay with that.
Yeah. Again, and that's why I go back to, I would have been okay with this being completely one note. And in fact, I think in this case, it needed to be. It needed to be a completely one note, singular version of a romance. Because again, this is certainly a theory. I have no idea what the behind the scenes was for this film, but it very much feels like she wanted to craft an original love story and was told, no, we need to have some sort of marketing push behind this. And Wuthering Heights is an IP that people are familiar with, because she certainly, given the vision of this film, has no reverence for the material. And it like does her damnedest to completely separate herself from that original novel and wants to tell her own story in her own way, which again, I don't have a problem with if you commit to that vision. I just don't think she does. And that's the problem. But to your point, if it was just a one note version of lust and desire, becoming the thematic and emotional crux for your demise, and you do it in a way where it's essentially a music video the whole time, I think that's fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But she wants to have her cake and eat it too. And it just, that's where it falls apart.
Sometimes you just got to give us the cake. Just give us the sweets and we'll devour it the way that we want.
And this was maybe more of a final thought, but since we're already having the conversation, and we did tease this at the beginning of the conversation, but for me, that is the thing with Fennell. I do think she is a great director, has a prowess in terms of craft, but she needs to work with another writer. She needs to take someone else's script that has a completely separate vision that is not her own and direct that and bring her style to that. She needs to be Danny Boyle and find her Alex Garland. That's what she needs to do.
Great. That's a great comp. It's a great comp.
Or again, if I'm going to comp her to Wes Anderson was able to find his voice and find that perfect middle ground between his quirkiness as a director and the material on the page. He found that marriage.
He also works with co-writers a lot.
And he did, especially early on. Yeah. And I think that's where Fennell needs to go next, I think.
Yeah. I at least if she really wants to keep delivering the substance like this and not just the style,
and that's okay.
Which is okay, but like I think this is a case where some of the music-y, montage-y moments are when it's at its best, and I would have preferred that because I think that's just simply where her skills are.
Can I talk about another major issue I have with this film?
I mean, among many, I have a few others that I haven't even gotten to yet, but let's hear how you want to start this one off.
All right. I want to talk about Catherine as a character, not Robbie's performance. Margot Robbie is great, but Catherine as a character is one of the bigger issues of this film for me as well.
All right. This might tailor to something else I was going to bring up.
There is a lack of self-awareness with the character that I find baffling. Most of what happens here are a result of her own actions. But then the film does nothing to acknowledge that. It reminded me of, again, to bring it back to sports, because that's what we do. It reminded me of, and this actually tailors to all sports, but as a hockey person, I go to the NHL first. In hockey, when a player commits a penalty and then they act like they didn't do it, I didn't trip him. And then they show the replay and he clearly tripped the guy.
I love that. Yeah.
That's exactly what this feels like. The film is like, what do you mean? What do you mean? It does nothing to acknowledge that about Catherine. For example, there's that moment when Catherine tells Nellie that she can't marry Heathcliff because of his societal status. Famous part of the story.
Yeah.
Well, that sequence begins with Catherine being quite cruel to Nellie. She gave Nellie an emotional pathway to undermine her. And later on in the film, she calls Nellie out for treason, as if that was completely egregious and unwarranted. Catherine, hello? What did you think was going to happen? The film never acknowledges the cruelty of Catherine toward Nellie and how that set in motion these series of events, which gets even worse when Nellie then goes tell Edgar, which then leads to Catherine isolating, which leads to Nellie burning the letters. And look, from Nellie's perspective, that's when she takes it a little bit too far. But even if Catherine got those letters and she fully recovered and she was able to reconnect with Heathcliff, would she have ever apologized to Nellie? I get that it's implied that Catherine does apologize or say something loving toward Nellie on her deathbed, but I'm not convinced that if Nellie just gave her the letters and she fully recovered, that she would be as gracious. The film gave us zero indication that would happen. It awfully feels like we are supposed to empathize with Catherine because Nellie made the choices she did. Maybe I'm wrong. But that's the impression I got. And I think it's the result of the film failing to give cogency to its themes on lust and desire, as we're talking about. And again, if the film really committed to that theme, this would have been way more impactful than it is. The idea of Catherine's lust and desires leading to her demise is in direct contrast to how the film treats her in regards to Nellie. It is a big problem narratively. Even if I remove all of the context of the book, you remove all of that aside, that on its own terms is confounding. I don't understand that at all.
Catherine is a questionable character in this movie for me, for a lot of the reasons that you're talking about. It seemingly lets her off the hook more so than it should, and I think a lot of that is mostly just due to some very incomplete writing. I don't know if that was the intent, to create some type of provocation of how Kathy kind of marries up the high society ladder, right? And there's something kind of icky about the portrayal of Kathy here, more so from Emerald Fennell's writing standpoint than it is Margot Robbie.
It's a writing thing for sure.
I admittedly, I did not find Kathy all that compelling generally, and I don't want to blame Margot Robbie for that, but at times I do think she may have been a little bit miscast. I'm not sure if she's the type of actress for this type of role, but I also don't think the material, or at least the adaptation of this material, is giving her the room to really take advantage of that. So there's a lot of conflicting things happening that ultimately makes Kathy as a character kind of a failed character for me in this world. And especially when you think about how Wuthering Heights as a place is portrayed here as kind of run down, dilapidated, soon to be condemned, essentially. How Kathy essentially marries up into high society, and how Heathcliff then kind of has this almost vengeful relationship to that, this jealousy towards that, especially given how he was brought into this family at Wuthering Heights as, I guess, a steward. I was listening to the Big Picture podcast, and they made a great note at the end of it, how Emerald Fennell's own upbringing, and I don't know if you know this, JD, it clashes quite heavily with the material in all three of her movies.
I was going to wait to get there, but we're here.
Well, I think it does. I think it does correlate to your problems with Catherine and my problems with Catherine. I think there is a connection there, and why it ultimately doesn't work for both of us. And I think it's because this is why I find her film so misguided. Because I feel like, given her own upbringing, which is, let's just say, not poor. I think that's how Sean Fennessy put it on The Big Picture. So I'm quoting him here. So I can't take credit for that really clever wording there.
This has been a talking point since her first film, even.
Since Promising Young Woman. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, her father is Theo Fennell, who I guess is dubbed the king of bling, the jewelry designer. She grew up in a very bohemian lifestyle in London. So she has a very particular upbringing that her movies are alluding to in some way, but it always seems to showcase the less fortunate, the middle class, as kind of the villains of these stories. And I don't know what to make of that, because I don't think that is the intent. Like, if that was the intent, to provoke us in that way, I don't know if I get behind that, but I at least be willing to have a conversation about that. I just don't think that is the intent. And there's something kind of icky about how that is portrayed, given the real person who's telling these stories, right? Like, that's just kind of off for me.
Well, and that's why I do feel like we have to bring up the discourse surrounding this film, because there has been a lot of pushback online about enjoying this film without having to be academic about it, or being able to criticize it without reading the book, and all this discourse between the fans of the book and fans of Fennell. However, I do think this is important. It is very much worth noting, especially given the context of Fennell's background as you just laid out there.
Yeah.
In the book, we do know that Heathcliff is a man of color.
Yeah, that too.
And that is vital given that so much of the novel is about class and racism. The fact that he's picked up at a slave port in Liverpool is really important context. And obviously, it's a central facet as to why Catherine doesn't marry him. So once again, we go back to Fennell and her approach to this material and how it's fundamentally flawed. Maybe I'm right, and she was denied an original erotica by the studios. But no matter how it came to be, choosing Wuthering Heights as your adaptation and refusing to engage with its politics is deeply, deeply misguided. It completely misses the point of Bronte's intentions. It's exactly why it feels exploitative in terms of Fennell stealing the IP to tell her own story with her own characters. And it's evident, like that comes through in a couple of different ways. One of the more, I don't even know what adjective to use here, Brian, but one of the crazier things about this film, and this kind of goes back to what we were just talking about with Catherine and her relationship with Nellie, but also how Edgar comes into the picture. Wuthering Heights was written as a critique to slavery and to demonstrate how the system created cycles of violence for everyone involved, which is crazy when you consider that Nellie here is an Asian woman and Edgar is a brown man. And again, it feels like this film wants us to consider them as the perpetrators and that Catherine and Heathcliff are the victims. Maybe, to your point, as I noted, maybe I am misreading the room here and misreading Fennell's intentions, but that's how it comes off. And given how she actively refuses to engage with the book's central themes, I just cannot give her the benefit of the doubt.
I think
especially when you consider, again, that context that you brought up as well. And again, it might not be purposeful. It might not be
that's what I was just about to say.
It could just be accidental. I don't know.
It could
but
be
I still cannot give her the benefit of the doubt when she is removing vital content. And that's why I go back to adapting this material was just, she should have just done her own story, not an adaptation of Wuthering Heights.
Well,
she clearly just wanted to tell a romance with maybe a slight eroticism to it, because there's not a lot of that here, a slight eroticism to it that tells a story about lust and how that becomes your demise. That is completely separate from what Wuthering Heights actually is. It's two different things.
Well, and I think you're right that the way that Emerald Fennell is perceiving this material, especially in relation to her upbringing and how it's essentially the white characters who are victimized, even though they seem to be performing the most villainous acts, arguably. I think, if anything, that is something that Fennell just doesn't know how to separate herself from. Like you said, it might be accidental. I think it's entirely possible that she's just unable to disconnect from that privilege of how she was grown up, right? And this is, we often praise directors who try to step outside their demographic comfort zones to tell a story that might not be theirs, but they're trying to learn from that and maybe work with other voices to also do that in the process. One of my favorite examples is something like The Last Black Man in San Francisco from 2019. Joe Talbot's a white filmmaker, but worked very closely with Jimmy Fails to tell that story accordingly, right? Yeah. That's a great example of that kind of cultural open-mindedness. And I think I think that's what she needs if she's trying to do something like this adaptation in particular. But if she was more interested in telling an old school, old timely epic romance film filled with eroticism and passion, and the studio did get in the way and say, no, you have to do something IP related, clearly the studio recommended the wrong material then. I mean, Imagine if she did something like this for Romeo and Juliet. That might have actually been pretty interesting. That actually would have been very interesting, I think. And maybe maybe this is on the studio if your theory is true. Maybe they just simply recommended the wrong IP for her.
I mean, that certainly could be the case, unless the intent here was to be something like Baz Luhrmann's version of Romeo and Juliet, which was clearly, similarly modernized and anachronistic.
And I like
very
that
different,
film.
weird, and unique. But the difference is Baz Luhrmann, while modernizing that material, maintained the spirit of it. That's the difference. And
Sure.
I agree with you. I really like that adaptation a lot. The spirit is very much there. The spirit of Wuthering Heights is completely absent. It is foreign. It is in another galaxy.
Well, like we said,
it is not even close.
This is quote unquote Wuthering Heights. It's not just Wuthering Heights. The quotes are very important, apparently.
And again, that's why just go make your own original movie if that was going to be, like, if that's what you wanted to do. But like attaching it to Wuthering Heights and then completely showing no reverence to it and removing important context and essentially just telling a very different story and stealing the characters' names. I just don't understand the approach. Like, I don't understand what she was trying to accomplish here. Like, another example, maybe you and I will disagree a little bit on this, given your thoughts earlier on Allison Oliver.
Okay.
But I thought similarly, with Isabella as well. And I know there's been some debate regarding this character. But again, going back to the novel, Heathcliff is a victim early on of abuse, obviously, given the slavery and the racism at play. But then he goes on to be the perpetrator of abuse because, again, the book is about cycles of violence.
Yeah.
And so he manipulates her into this marriage and is physically harrowing to her, which is heartbreaking and adds arresting nuance to both characters, as Isabella was confident enough to cross those racial barriers and marry him, which obviously would have been taboo at the time. And it was something that Catherine was not willing to do. And here in this film, she becomes complicit and eager to participate in her own degradation. And again, it's one of those things where it just seems like Fennell either didn't read the material or simply does not care, does not have any reference toward Bronte's work and what she was trying to accomplish. Because again, we gotta funnel it through the superficial machinations of erotica and trying to do something fun and interesting and provocative from a visual perspective. And it might work in that case because I don't have any issues with Oliver's performance. Given what she was asked to do, she nails it. And she is great. She steals those scenes. But again, from a writing perspective, from a fundamental perspective, it completely undermines what the original material was trying to accomplish. So again, I'm not asking this film to be a one-to-one adaptation, but when you're asking it to maintain the spirit, which is what we ask for any adaptation, change it, make it different, make it unique, make it your own. That's the case for any adaptation.
But at least commit to whatever that goal is.
Yeah. I recently finished reading Train Dreams. That book is nothing like the movie.
Yeah.
The movie, like, it is unbelievable, the adaptation in terms of the screenplay. Excuse me.
I love that.
Into the those two things are nothing alike in terms of writing, but the spirit is the exact same, and that's what makes it great. And we could go down the line, but every great adaptation, it's all about maintaining the spirit of the source material, showing reverence to it.
Yeah. Or if your intent is to not show reverence to it, at least commit to that idea. And I'm not sure if Fennell's
Yeah.
even doing that, even if it
And
does.
that boy, that would have been ballsy to be like Wuthering
w-
Heights, that movie or that
yeah,
book.
yeah. I kind of would have appreciated that if at least committed to that idea. I don't know if I can defend.
No one take that out of context. By the
No,
way,
no.
don't clip this and make it look like that's what I'm doing here.
No. You're forgiven, man. You're forgiven. I don't know if I can forgive the writing of the Isabella character here, but Allison Oliver's performance is the one performance that started to fill some of those gaps in the writing for me, where I started to at least sit back and think about, oh, okay, Fennell's doing something interesting here. Like that was, and that's why I gave her such praise earlier on in the conversation. It's really more to do with Allison Oliver's performance specifically, not just how she steals those scenes, but she taps into something that is kind of inexplicable for me that I can't really put my finger on. But every time she was on screen, I started to sit back and think, okay, maybe Fennell's tapping into something. I don't know what that is, but it didn't make me forgive what the film's intent was, if there even was one, but it did start getting me to think about it more. And then when it would transition back to both Heathcliff and Kathy, then I would lose all interest once again. And that's why I gave Oliver a lot of praise early on.
And I do agree that she does serve Fennell's vision. And going back to the mixed results of the movie, and perhaps where this film ultimately fails is in the lack of commitment, because I do think if we just look at it in a vacuum and how Isabella complements Heathcliff and his heartless scheming, tapping into the film's ideas of lust and demise, I do think those sequences here in a vacuum are effective.
Yeah.
They are great in that regard. But again, as we've talked about incessantly here, the film doesn't fully commit to that, gets lost in the shuffle between being an adaptation and its own thing. So in the end, it's ultimately not enough. And because that is the result, and individually, subjectively, I also struggle to completely remove the missing context of the book, because the film cannot commit to being its own singular thing.
Right.
It wants to be an adaptation. And then when you include the context of the character in the book and the agency she has there ultimately, but and especially how groundbreaking the character's actions are in a lot of ways, like that being removed for what we do get here in this half-hearted way, like in the end, while again, I can enjoy them in a vacuum, but on the whole, I just, it comes off extremely artificial to me.
It's very unclear, and not in the way that, provokes us to think about it further.
Yeah.
Fennell is very good at Fennell is very good at poking the bear visually, as there are things that she likes to show us that get you, ooh, that was crossing the line a little bit. But I rarely am I ever compelled to think about what those provocative visions mean. Like I still remember the grave site masturbation scene from Saltburn, yet I never think about it more deeply than what I actually saw on screen. I appreciate her going there and showing us something like that, but I don't think about it further. If you're able to think about it further, then all power to you for finding something, finding some meat under those bones, right?
Yeah.
But I don't feel anything else outside of that.
Yeah. If anything, it's the antithesis for me. I think about why those films don't work and how baffling I find it to be. That's ultimately where the provocation goes. It's not in terms of, man, wasn't that a great film with these great rich themes and these awesome characters that I loved? It's usually the opposite of that. If I'm thinking about those movies, it's about how disappointed I am and
you're
how egregious the writing is.
You're provoked by, wow, what a compelling image that means absolutely nothing to me.
Yeah. And I can, again, I can separate those things. I can appreciate the images on their own, and I can appreciate the brazenness in the craft and in the filmmaking. And I do admire the ambition. I would much prefer an Emerald Fennell to the safe mediocrity we get with a lot of other filmmakers whose films are just completely forgettable.
I mean, yeah, we there are probably a few Marvel movies out there that I would probably grade higher than Wuthering Heights, but we would only talk about them for like 20 minutes, and then we'd say all we have to say. We've been talking for an hour, and there's still more that we can talk about here. And that's like, I kind of I at least appreciate that this movie exists in this way to spearhead a conversation, even if I didn't really care for it all that much.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that's the case with the other two movies as well. And that's not nothing. That is certainly worth considering with Emerald Fennell for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I do find these films quite flawed. And it all comes back to the writing, as we've noted about 1,000 times in this conversation. But
is this your least favorite of her three then? Do you even have a ranking at this point?
I don't think a ranking really matters, as I'm not all that high on either of them, but I will. I
think that's a funny question to ask, but because it's like ranking three movies that are probably all 2.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd, right?
Yeah, Wuthering Heights, though, I do think is my least favorite of them, and that's because, again, I can't separate how she shows zero reverence to the novel. The fact that she doesn't fully commit to her vision and therefore invites more criticism because she completely fails to realize what makes Wuthering Heights Wuthering Heights. Like, none of that is here at all, but the film is titled Wuthering Heights, and we're stealing the characters' names and some of their backgrounds. Obviously not all of them, but some of them. So it feels exploitative in a way that I certainly did not experience with Promising Young Woman and Saltburn. I do have my issues with those films as well, but they didn't have this egregious exploitative ickiness to it that I very much felt with Wuthering Heights.
I probably would have been more okay with that ickiness that you're talking about if I just didn't find the movie itself so tedious. And that really is my biggest problem with it. Just as a narrative, as a story, I was never compelled by it, which is ultimately why it is my least favorite of the three. I just don't think Fennell has the goods to back up that type of ickiness or that provocation if that was her intent. I'm not a big fan of Promising Young Woman or Saltburn either, but I was at least more curious where those narratives were going. I wasn't fully invested in them like I was here, but I was more invested by comparison. I think it just comes down to that.
Yeah, and I think that's perfectly fair. I wanted to be invested in this, but
Same.
It felt like as the film went along and it was increasingly becoming more clear that it was going to eradicate what makes the novel so great. And again, I do want to be clear on this, although if you're still listening to us at this point, you probably already agree with this anyway. Fans of this film have probably already tuned out. But I do think it's worth repeating that I'm not wholly against the idea of what she was wanting to do here in terms of focusing and emphasizing the romance and, again, those ideas of lust and how it leads to your demise and examining that as something that is synonymous. That is a fascinating idea on paper. It really is. But when she fails to commit to that, that's my problem, because that's when the veil is lifted and then the things that she removes, like those criticisms are invited in the conversation now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where it becomes,
that's where it collapses on itself.
A big problem. That's where it collapses. Yeah. And like, I just can't fathom, telling a story about Titanic, but nothing about it is about the Titanic.
That'd be hilarious.
I mean, imagine that movie and it takes place somewhere other than Titanic, and we never mention Titanic, and it's never about the boat.
Takes place on the iceberg.
Okay. Like, what are we doing here? But that's very much what this is.
Sure.
and it's confounding. I don't understand.
Or it's
the
like we're
the
or it's
purpose of
like we're
this.
adapting Harry Potter, but the entire series takes place just him at the Dursleys before he goes off to his first year at Hogwarts.
Yeah, I mean that's not like we're missing key things here.
Harry's underneath the stairs. He can overhear his uncle and aunt having rigorous sodomized sex in the way that Fennell likes to portray here, and that's that's all the franchise ever was.
Like, could you fathom? But that's very much what she's doing with Wuthering Heights by butchering it the way that she does. But again, if you commit to a movie that isn't about Titanic, but it very much commits to that vision or commits to being Harry Potter before he goes off, and that's all that it is, but we're fully committed to that, then that's one thing.
Sure.
Even if you're exploiting it, the name for marketing purposes, like you can make that work. And again, it doesn't come together here. That's the problem.
The last thing I'll say here is there was a tweet going around. It was everyone was quote tweeting this image of Emerald Fennell when she was playing pregnant Barbie in Barbie, and I think the prompt asked everyone, "What's the next material that Emerald Fennell could adapt that would piss you off the most, or something that would get everyone angry?" And I was thinking, like, what would that answer be? I don't know. The Godfather.
Maybe, yeah. Look, as long as I think she just needs to go to telling original stories. Like, stay away from IP, stay away from adaptations, because you're just, especially if this is going to be your thing. If you're trying to provoke and there's nothing behind the imagery, it's hollow, then I feel like now you're just provoking because you're trying to be a provocateur. There's no meat on the bone. Like, but at least if you're telling your own stories, you can get away with that a little bit more because they're yours.
We're more forgiving of that. Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, this is where it becomes like, I most of the time I try to separate myself from the adaptation, and sometimes that's easier to do. Like Train Dreams, I didn't, I read the novel afterwards, or I wasn't familiar with it at all. Wuthering Heights is different. I was very familiar with the book. Again, even if you've never read it, you've seen 100 of these adaptations before.
Sure.
It's so in popular culture that you have a very good idea of what you're getting into. And just removing that vital context to serve your white characters.
It's weird. It's weird.
It's weird. Yeah, it's weird. And again, maybe just indicative of her, like the ignorance that for growing up.
Yeah, she probably just can't separate that privilege. Which again, we don't know for sure. We're just assuming that, but it's entirely possible.
Conjecture, but yeah. Anyway, anything else to say about this movie?
we talked for over an hour, so hey, the film spearheaded a conversation. So we like movies that do this, even if we don't like the movies. And I hope people go see it because I want to see more movies like this. I don't want to see, I don't want to see other forms of CGI soup IP that we normally get that take its place. I'd rather get something like this that we can actually talk about and have, a compelling conversation about.
Yeah. I will say this. I got two final thoughts here real quick.
Okay.
I do want to once again go back to Jacob Elordi. Again, I don't love the writing of this film. I think he is incredible here. He's by far my favorite thing about this film. And I think it just comes back to how he is able to give that character an emotional fortitude that really isn't there on the page. But I did feel the convictions of that character. And I do think more than any of these other characters, there is a bit of a progression in terms of how much you empathize with him early on. And by
there's
the
more
end,
of an
how
arc.
much you loathe
There's more of an
him.
arc there.
Yes. And that is almost primarily because of his performance. It's maybe a little bit there on the page, but that arc is primarily his. And I think it's way more successful than someone like Margot Robbie. I love Margot Robbie. I don't think she's terrible here, but Catherine is not a very likable character. And as I noted earlier, I feel like the film wants us to empathize with her. So
Yeah.
it's not entirely her fault. Again, I think it goes back to Emerald's writing and how there's just this disconnect between what's there on the page and what we're supposed to feel.
Oh, it felt like she was given no direction, Margot Robbie specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. It felt like a lost performance because the narrative was very quite lost, and she's the lead.
Yeah.
And we spend the most time with her.
It did seem, at the very least, it seemed as though Fennell was actually more interested in Heathcliff as a character, given what we actually saw here. Yeah.
Yes. Also, Charlotte Mellington as young Catherine and Owen Cooper as young Heathcliff. Very good. Owen Cooper, though, is noteworthy because he came onto the scene in a huge way last year with the Netflix series Adolescent, which I have not seen. Have you seen that?
I know it's a 4-part series. I started watching it. I only got a little bit through the first episode and I was like, this is not for me. It's got critical acclaim, but I felt it. I thought it was kind of gross and exploitative in serious tragedy. And I didn't go for it, but I can understand why people would. But just generally speaking of that young actor, I feel like there's a rising star happening here. Just given how good that he is here at the very least.
Yeah. And I think that's why I wanted to bring it up. I know that he's gotten a ton of acclaim. He's won a bunch of awards. And while I haven't seen it, I have seen some of his speeches, and they've been very endearing. He seems like a great young actor. But this was my introduction to him. And I thought those two young actors stole this movie. I mean, we somewhat passed on it because there was so much to talk about. But those two young actors, like, I could have watched a whole movie just them. Those two.
Me too.
Like, that is found gold. You know, again, sometimes in sports, you draft these players in like the 6th, 7th round, and you don't think anything of it, and then but sometimes you strike gold and then become all stars.
They are the underdogs. Yeah.
You put those two in a movie that's completely separate from this, but just give them another pairing, like another opportunity to be a partnership. I'm just saying, you might strike something there.
Yeah, I love them in this. I think they
were
good.
Really, really good.
Yeah.
Hong Chow, I think, is really great. I think the film completely underutilizes her. I think, in fact, I would go the other way and just say I feel like the film egregiously uses her. The contextualization of Nellie here, I think, is bad. Same thing with Edgar as well, and Shazad Latif. But given that, performatively, I think they're good here, given what they're asked to do. So just wanted to note that as well. I know you mentioned it earlier. It's been a big talking point, but Charlie XCX, the music here.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I love the music here, but I just love the vibe that it's going for. I love the minor key kind of slow melodicism that it's going for. It's very eerie, very ethereal, which is just more my speed. I know Charlie XCX is really an up-and-coming pop star nowadays, especially with her album Brat, which admittedly was not for me. But I like what this was going for, stylistically and musically. I thought this was really quite good.
I'm at a bit of a double-edged sword with it because I think the music is really good. I listened to the soundtrack on the whole twice earlier today, and I do really enjoy it. I enjoyed it in the moment. I like it outside the context of the film as well. But given the foundational flaws here, there is something about the music that can be distracting as well, because you're constantly being pulled away from the material, and
that's why it should have just been a music video, 2-hour music video.
That's probably what it should have been.
And just co-write the movie with Charlie XCX.
Yeah. So, speaking of, I haven't seen her other film, The Moment. I gotta catch up with that one.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen that yet either. Heard pretty good things.
Yeah. So I'm excited to get into that as well here pretty soon. At any rate, that's Wuthering Heights. I think we can go ahead and end that one here. But if you agree or disagree, and look, if Twitter is any indication.
You either really agree or you don't.
You either are seething or you're very in agreement with us. Either way, let us know in the comments. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can reach out to us on social media at In Session Film. You'll find us on all those platforms at In Session Film. You can also email us insessionfilm@gmail.com as well. Be on the lookout. So later on this week, we will have another review. We're going to be talking about the Gore Verbinski film. He has a new film out.
He does.
Very excited.
Been a long time.
Fun. Don't Die. We're going to be talking about that one. The main show this week, episode 675, it is available right now. I was not there. The great Megan Kearns filled in for me as Brendan and Megan talked about their top 5 epic romance movies.
Yeah, it was a good time.
And I will say, I might repeat this on next week's main show as well. Maybe I'll just give a quick top 5 of my own. But Brendan's number 5, easily my number 1. Without question, my number 1.
I knew of all people you would at least defend my pick there.
Oh my gosh, yes. I tweeted about this. I put it on Facebook. I even made a TikTok of it. I put it everywhere on Valentine's Day. My favorite romance by far is Brendan's number 5, so you can go and check it out. But if you've listened to the show at all over the course of the last 6 months, you probably already know what it is. Or if you follow us on social media.
If you've been on TikTok at all, you probably know what it is because it's been kind of viral for a little bit.
I'm telling you, like every day I find a new video with that cue, just somewhere there. It's been incredible. Very, very good. New Women in Session later on this week as well. New Chasing the Gold. So be on the lookout for all of that. I'm trying to think with Chasing the Gold, there was the Indie Spirit Awards this last weekend.
Yeah, that happened.
I'm guessing that's what they're going to be talking about. And in less than a month's time, we got the Oscars.
I know.
So,
Conan O'Brien. That's what I'm looking forward to again.
There's no reason it should be March 15th. It should be February 15th. We should be done with all this by now.
I know. Yeah, we really should. We really should. We need to transition to the new year more quickly. Come on, Hollywood.
Yeah. Make the Oscars shorter again. I don't know if that fits on a hat, but make the Oscars shorter again.
Not only that,
not the ceremony, but like award season.
Award season itself, yeah. Although
make award season shorter again.
Well, make the ceremony longer depending on who you get to host. But I mean, after Conan, if they don't bring him back, is it finally time for them to bring the Muppets in to host?
You know, it's very funny. I thought about you the other day when I saw those statistics with Disney Plus. And at Disney World, I'm very much on Disney World TikTok as well because we go pretty often. And they're creating a new Muppets area as we speak. So, like, Muppets are huge right now, man. They're a huge comeback.
And the Oscars, that airs on what, ABC? It's a Disney property, right?
For now. Soon it's going to be to YouTube.
Well, still, but like this is a golden opportunity for the Oscars to take advantage of that at least one more time before it moves to YouTube.
That's true. That's true. We shall see, but that would be a great idea. I'm very much on board with it. All right. With all that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast.